I was never meant to be in that concert hall. At least, not in the eyes of the people who belonged there. The gold trim on the walls, the rows of velvet seats, the crystal chandeliers, they were all screaming for the kind of people who had their names and programs and plaques. I was just there to support a friend. I wore a navy dress I bought on clearance 2 years ago, the one I'd saved for special occasions, though I never imagined that special meant somewhere I'd stick out like a sore thumb. You might be wondering why I looked so nervous before the music even started. Let's just say, I have history with pianos. A complicated history I'd buried under years of paying bills and ignoring the urge to touch the keys. I sat in the third row, close enough to see the reflection of the stage lights and the glossy black surface of the Steinway, close enough to feel the vibrations when the first pianist struck the opening notes. It was magical. And then he walked in, Vincent Clair. If you know classical music, you know his name. Arrogant genius. Critics call him the voice of Chopin for the modern age. I call him a man who enjoys the sound of his own applause. He wore a suit so sharp it probably had an insurance policy. The audience gave him a standing ovation before he played a single note, and he lapped it up like a cat with cream. I clapped too, but quietly, almost mechanically. I'd read enough about him to know his reputation wasn't just about talent. It was about humiliating people who didn't measure up to his impossible standards. But during the intermission, things changed. I was standing by the refreshment table, pretending to enjoy a plastic cup of champagne, when Vincent appeared in the doorway surrounded by admirers. His eyes scanned the room like a spotlight. Then they landed on me. He walked over, slow and deliberate, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "You look like you could use some excitement," he said, in that smooth, accented voice. I raised an eyebrow. "And you look like you already have enough for the both of us." A few people chuckled, but Vincent wasn't the type to let a comeback slide. "Tell me," he continued, "do you play?" The room got quieter. I glanced at the grand piano in the corner, closed for the break. "A little," I said, already regretting it. He leaned in, conspiratorially. "Why don't you give us a demonstration? For fun. A little entertainment between courses." There it was, a challenge, wrapped in velvet, but sharp underneath. It wasn't a real invitation. It was bait. A prank, meant to let the great Vincent Clair show how unworthy the humble woman was compared to his genius. The crowd loved it. A ripple of anticipation moved through them like static. I could have laughed it off. I could have said no and walked away. But something in his tone, that subtle twist of condescension, lit a fuse I hadn't felt in years. I took a sip of champagne, set the cup down, and said, "Why not?" The murmur in the room deepened. Vincent led me to the piano, his hand gesturing toward the bench like a ringmaster inviting a clown into the center ring. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. I sat, smoothed my dress, and let my fingers hover over the keys. I didn't look at him. Instead, I closed my eyes and thought of my grandmother. She was the one who taught me to play when I was 6. She couldn't afford lessons for herself as a child, so she poured everything she knew into me. She taught me Bach, Beethoven, and the discipline to practice until my fingers ached. And she taught me something Vincent had clearly never learned. Music isn't about showing off. It's about telling the truth. I started with a single note, soft, deliberate, then another. The room faded until it was just me and the piano, speaking a language that didn't care about designer suits or famous names. I built it slowly, like lighting a fire. Quiet sparks growing into something that demanded attention. The audience, restless moments before, grew still. When I shifted into a passage from Rachmaninoff, I felt the air change. It wasn't perfect, not by competition standards. But it was alive. Every note carried a piece of me, memories of my grandmother's laugh, the feel of her worn sheet music, the summers we spent practicing until the sun dipped below the horizon. I didn't notice Vincent at first. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. He wasn't smirking anymore. His arms were crossed, but not in defiance. more like he was bracing against something he hadn't expected to feel. When I reached the final chord, I let it linger. The sound filled the room, sank into the floorboards, into the bones of everyone listening. Silence followed, not awkward, but reverent. Then, applause. It started with one pair of hands, then another, until the entire room was on its feet. I stood slowly, my heart pounding. Vincent stepped forward, clapping. For a moment, I thought he might actually say something gracious. Instead, he leaned in just enough for me to hear and said, "Not bad, for a secretary." I smiled, not because of the insult, but because he still didn't know. The man who thought he was playing a prank had just handed me the stage. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't done with it. What happened next wasn't in the program. One of the event organizers, a stern woman with silver hair and the posture of a general, came over. "Miss Jennings," she said, "would you be willing to play in the gala finale? Our soloist for the closing piece had an emergency." I glanced at Vincent, who was suddenly very interested in the floor. "I'd be honored," I said. The finale was scheduled for after the second half of the concert. I spent those minutes in the green room, fingers flexing, heart steadying, knowing this was more than a performance. It was a reclamation. When the time came, I walked on stage, not as an intermission sideshow, but as the closing act of the night. And when I finished, the ovation wasn't just for the music. It was for the fact that sometimes the punchline belongs to the person who wasn't supposed to have one. The applause still rang in my ears as I walked off the stage, but I didn't have time to bask in it. The green room was alive with murmurs, musicians whispering to each other, a stagehand slipping me a bottle of water, eyes darting toward me with that mix of curiosity and calculation. I could feel it. Word was spreading, and it wasn't just about the music. Someone must have told them what had happened in the intermission. The humble woman Vincent had tried to make a spectacle of had just closed the gala's finale. I sat in the corner, away from the makeup mirrors, letting my pulse settle. In the reflection of the polished cello case across from me, I could see my own expression, calm on the surface, but with an ember of something deeper burning inside. Defiance, satisfaction, maybe even a little hunger. Then I heard it. Footsteps, measured and deliberate, approaching down the hall. Vincent's. I didn't turn until his shadow stretched across the doorway. "You certainly know how to steal a scene," he said, his tone hovering between accusation and reluctant admiration. I sipped the water and looked up at him. "Funny, I thought you handed it to me." A flicker passed over his face. He wasn't used to someone matching him line for line. "You have a touch," he admitted. "But let's be honest, the audience loves a surprise. That's all you were tonight." He wanted me to swallow that, to accept that my moment was an accident, a novelty. But he didn't know that this wasn't my first stage, nor my first time dealing with someone who thought the lights belonged only to them. "I'm fine with surprises," I said, "especially the kind people remember." His jaw tightened, and for a brief second, I saw what was under all that polished charm. A need to control the narrative, to make sure every story ended with him as the protagonist. The conversation was interrupted when the silver-haired organizer appeared again, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Miss Jennings, may I speak with you?" Vincent stepped back, his presence lingering like cologne in the air. "We have a private reception upstairs," she continued. "Benefactors, press, a few board members. They'd like to meet you." My instinct was to decline. These rooms were shark tanks in evening wear. But something in me, the same fuse that lit when Vincent smirked at me earlier, told me to go. Upstairs, the reception was a soft blur of clinking glasses, low jazz from a corner trio, and the polite hum of money at rest. The silver-haired woman introduced me to a semicircle of patrons, names I half recognized from art donations and foundation boards. They asked the usual questions. "Where did you study? Who have you performed with? What are your current projects?" I could have lied, dropped prestigious names, but instead I told the truth. I haven't performed professionally in years. Life took me in a different direction. A man in a navy tuxedo raised an eyebrow. "And yet, you walked out there tonight like you never left." I shrugged, letting a hint of us the side was assigned. The ceiling of the cloud was life and wealth. Across the room, I caught sight of Vincent, speaking to a journalist, his gestures more animated than usual. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. He was spinning the story, framing it so he was still the centerpiece, the benevolent mentor who discovered a hidden talent. That wasn't going to fly. A woman I hadn't noticed before, a sharp-eyed figure with a press badge, slipped up beside me. "Clara Jennings?" she asked, flipping open a small notebook. "Mind if I get your side of what happened tonight?" This was the moment. I could play it safe, be humble, let Vincent control the headlines. Or I could be very clear about what tonight really was. "Sure," I said. "You want to know the truth? I wasn't part of the program. I was here as a guest." During the break, Vincent decided it would be amusing to put me on the spot, to see me flounder in front of his audience. I don't think he expected me to enjoy the challenge. Her pen scratched across the page. "So it wasn't planned?" "Not by me," I said, my voice steady. "But I suppose every performance is planned by someone. Tonight, the plan just backfired." She grinned, thanked me, and moved off. I felt lighter, as if a weight had shifted. I didn't have to fight for the stage anymore. The truth had its own momentum. On my way out of the reception, I passed Vincent again. He looked at me, and for the first time that evening, there was no smirk, no performance. Just a glint of something I couldn't quite place. Respect? Or maybe the recognition that I wasn't going to be just a footnote in his story. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around me. The city was alive. The hum of traffic, the occasional burst of laughter from a passing group, the flicker of neon on wet pavement. I walked to the corner, the music from earlier still echoing in my mind. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "If you ever want to play again, seriously, call me. We could use someone like you." There was no name, just a number, but I had a feeling it wasn't from Vincent. I didn't know it then, but that message would be the start of something much bigger. I didn't call the number right away. I saved it, like a secret I wasn't ready to use yet. The next morning, the story was everywhere, at least everywhere in the circles that cared about classical music and charity galas. "Unknown pianist steals the show," one headline read. Another called me the mystery woman who silenced a room. The journalist from the reception had clearly done her job well. My phone buzzed with texts from friends I hadn't heard from in years. Some were congratulatory, some curious, some asking outright if I had staged the whole thing with Vincent. I didn't answer those. Let them wonder. That afternoon, the number texted again. "Tuesday, 3 p.m., Midtown Arts Center, Rehearsal Hall C." No name, no explanation. My first instinct was to ignore it, but then I thought of how Vincent had looked at me in that reception, like a chess player who just realized his opponent had more pieces than he thought. By Tuesday at 2:45, I was standing in front of a modern glass building with my heart hammering in my ears. Inside, Hall C smelled faintly of varnish and coffee. A tall man in his 60s, with the weathered hands of someone who'd spent his life coaxing sound from wood and steel, greeted me. "Clara, I'm Daniel Harper. I direct the Midtown Chamber Ensemble." I knew the name. Anyone who followed American classical music did. "We have an opening in our winter program," he said. "Our pianist had to withdraw for health reasons. I saw the video from the Gala. I think you'd fit." My brain scrambled for reasons to say no. Too long since I'd played seriously. My day job. The fact that I hadn't performed under contract in over a decade. But then Daniel smiled and said, "It's Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 1. 2. You know it? My grandmother's favorite." My pulse steadied. "I know it," I said. Over the next week, I slipped into a rhythm I hadn't known I missed. Morning coffee with sheet music spread across my kitchen table. Afternoons at the rehearsal hall. Evenings running through difficult passages until the neighbors probably knew the concerto by heart. The ensemble welcomed me, but I could feel their curiosity. Who was I? Why had they never heard of me? I let the music answer. 2 weeks before the concert, Daniel pulled me aside. "Vincent Leclerc is guest conducting the opening piece. My fingers froze on the edge of the piano bench. You're joking. No. He offered to step in when our conductor had a family emergency. I could see it already. Vincent, back in a position of control, standing at the podium like a king on his throne. Part of me wanted to walk away right then. But the other part, the one that had walked up to that piano during the gala instead of shrinking, was already calculating. Concert night came faster than I expected. The hall was different from the gala venue. Less gilded opulence, more sharp acoustics and tiered seating. But the audience had the same expectant energy. I could hear them from backstage, the low rustle of programs, the coughs, the occasional laugh. Vincent was there, of course. He looked every inch the master of ceremonies in his black suit and crisp white shirt. When he saw me warming up backstage, his expression didn't change, but I noticed the smallest pause before he continued speaking to a stagehand. He knew. The opening piece went flawlessly under his baton. He had that way of making an orchestra sound like one breathing creature. I almost let myself admire it. Almost. Then it was my turn. As I walked onto the stage, the audience applauded politely. Some recognized me from the gala. I could hear the whispers. Vincent stood at the side of the stage, not conducting this time, just watching. I sat at the Steinway, adjusted the bench, and let my fingers find the opening chords. Rachmaninoff demands everything. Strength, precision, emotion that can swell to fill the largest hall and then vanish to a whisper. I gave it all. Somewhere in the second movement, I stopped thinking about Vincent, about the gala, even about the audience. It was just me, the keys, and the echo of my grandmother's voice telling me to play the truth. The final movement roared, the orchestra behind me like a tide I was riding to shore. When the last note died, there was that beautiful, heavy silence before the applause. Then it came. Louder than the gala, louder than I'd ever imagined. The kind of applause that feels like it could knock you backward. I stood, bowed, and glanced toward the wing. Vincent was clapping. Not the slow, mocking clap of someone humoring a novelty act. Real applause. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw something new. Not surrender exactly, but recognition. He stepped forward as I moved to leave the stage. "Clara," he said quietly, just for me. "Looks like you found your stage." "No," I said, smiling just enough. "I've always had it. You just noticed." And then I walked past him, the sound of the audience still thundering behind me, out into the cool night air, where the city lights looked less like chandeliers and more like possibilities.